This is Keys to the Shop, episode 317, an encore episode of Death by Comparison. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFerio. I am the host for Keys to the Shop. I'm really excited to have you along today. I hope you had an amazing Thanksgiving week. And I want to say, if you haven't subscribed to Keys to the Shop, now is a really good time to do so. Just hit subscribe wherever you are listening to this show, and you will always be updated with new content as it comes out. This show curates and highlights some of the best ideas and people in the industry and subject matter experts from outside the coffee industry too, to help you build a thriving career and coffee business. So I would definitely say subscribe to the show. Also, share these episodes with friends, with your team. And if you know that somebody doesn't know about Keys to the Shop, it's really awesome to let them know that this resource exists. There's still so many people that have never listened to this show, and you are key to being able to spread the word about Keys to the Shop. Now, one of the ways that I get to serve you that really excites me is not just through this podcast, but also through consulting and coaching, where I get to work directly with you to help you either start your coffee business the right way, avoiding needless mistakes, and building foundations for a sustainable business, or I can come alongside existing operators and help you level up your operations, your people, the quality, all of that, either remotely or on site. There's a lot of different ways that we can work together, and I would love to explore what that might look like. So if you want to schedule a free 15-20-minute discovery call with me, then go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS at keystotheshop.com, and we'll find out if working with Keys to the Shop Consulting is right for you. Again, the email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode is brought to you by the wonderful Prima Coffee. They have been a world leader in commercial specialty coffee equipment because they not only curate the best coffee equipment from all over the world, both commercially and small wares, but they work hard to make sure their clients, their customers, are matched with the right equipment for their given shop, whether you're a brick and mortar, a trailer, a stand, drive-through, whatever. You're going to need slightly different equipment for different contexts, and they really do excel at working with you to make sure that you're getting the right gear. Now, you can get 5% off your entire order over at prima-coffee.com/keys. When you use the code KEYS5, that's KEYS and the number 5, you get 5% off your whole order, and you'll see when you go on that website how much they have to offer in terms of equipment, but also resources to help you learn that equipment and learn coffee as well. So if you want to work with someone dedicated to your success and you're in the market for specialty coffee equipment, definitely look up Prima Coffee. Again, that website, prima-coffee.com/keys. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Barista Series. This is my favorite plant-based beverage company. Their complete lineup of plant-based performance beverages are designed for the professional barista and with a lot of feedback from professional baristas around the world before it even gets into your bar fridge and you serve it to your customers. Because of that, you know that it's going to stand up to the heat from the steaming process. It's going to create microfoam so well that you can make latte art with it. And the flavor and balance in the cup is just second to none. It keeps the focus on the coffee, and it absolutely delights your customers. So go visit them over at pacificfoodservice.com. Get it in your store. Try it for yourself. Try it with your team. I think you're really going to be impressed. If you want to serve the best plant-based beverages to your customers, then you should be using the Barista Series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, today we are talking about death by comparison. Now, this was an episode that we put out a little bit ago. This was episode 46 of Keys to the Shop. That was all the way back in, I believe, well, it was in 2017, suffice it to say. And it was something that I've kind of touched on here and there ever since then, because we as an industry are continually connected. Even more and more, it's easy to take a peek around the world to see what is happening in the coffee industry, and then go into our own offices and our own roasteries and our coffee bars and either feel motivated by what we see or feel just kind of depressed and dejected and say, well, we're not really doing it because look what they're doing. And I wish we could be that. And even when you're inspired by somebody, sometimes that inspiration still pulls you away from what you really do have. And the whole point of this episode is to remind us that what we have in terms of assets and value and the richness of our current expression of coffee as a roastery or a coffee bar oftentimes is right in front of us, but the connection and community that we experience, as good as it can be in a lot of circumstances, can often create in a scenario where we do get caught up in it, and it creates a problem. And so I wanted to bring this episode back as we've talked about things like how your customers are not your peers and other kind of related episodes. I would go through the recommended related episodes in the show notes and listen to those as well. There'll probably be some shift breaks, some main episodes that talk about this. But I think it's really critical, especially now that we have access to the community as we never had before, to get to know what we have in front of us even better. Because if we don't counterbalance that, then we rob ourselves of the joy of what we currently have. So I hope that this is a helpful episode for you. So let's get right to it. Here now is the re-airing of episode 46 in the Keys to the Shop library, Death by Comparison. Today we are talking about comparison. And I know when I say that, you're probably conjuring up images that are kind of maybe negative images, things that we do maybe in our outside of coffee life. And but we'll get to that. But this was something I started to think about recently for several reasons, not the least of which is how much we talk about growth here on the show. And that implies that you measure yourself against a particular standard and you grow accordingly to that standard. And I believe that comparison is something you can do in a positive way, and it's not always bad. But I do think that we tend to err on the side of negative comparison and do so in a demotivating way. So the catalyst to this was really a chat that I was having with somebody about training, and how in training, the trainee will often try to goad the trainer into talking about how bad, whoever it may be. Oftentimes Starbucks is the whipping boy of this conversation. It could be Pete's, it could be their grandma's coffee or Maxwell House. I don't know. But whatever the antithesis is in their mind of specialty, there's this idea that they want to sort of talk out how great the coffee is by making some other coffee worse. And, as a wholesale trainer in the past, I know that this is a common thing, and it creates a sense of victory and an elevation of oneself too early in the game. And especially, I don't like the idea that it's said with such confidence, and I think it's rather more arrogance than anything. And so that kind of got me thinking, where else do we make comparisons in our lives as coffee professionals where this will negatively impact our growth? And it's all over the place. I know for me it is. I'll give you some examples here in a bit, but how do we negatively compare ourselves to others or compare our businesses to others? So mostly I think we're conditioned to test ourselves against the closest similar thing to us or our business to see if we are okay. Am I okay? It's like checking a phone to see how many people have retweeted or liked a post that we've put up. There is a rush that's associated with it that creates this dependency. It's like it literally is a chemical dependency that is formed in our brains to the approval of other people or a sense of belonging to a virtual reality. And that's not something that's constructed only by social media. That's something that was existing in our heads long before social media. It was just social opinion before it was social media. And now it's both. So you feel like you have to prove yourself or your business against a standard that is, by and large, and for the most part, impossible to achieve, that you imagine people are achieving and you're not. So an example would be a barista who feels that they aren't as good of a barista because they didn't win a competition. They practiced and practiced, and despite what they felt was an amazing routine, they didn't get into the semifinals. And the person who they thought had a terrible routine, for some reason, got in, and that's total crap, man. That they stole that, or whatever they're saying inside their head, maybe clapping on the outside. We've all been there. If you've competed, there's been these thoughts of maybe that person didn't deserve it. I know how hard I worked. There's a sense in which we start to compare and contrast in a destructive way. It doesn't add anything to how much better we can become, and it certainly doesn't add to the community. So another example would be a barista comparing their latte art to another barista's latte art on the bar, where you can become disheartened by seeing somebody make it look really easy. And you can do that to the degree that you even find yourself apologizing to the customer for latte art that the customer might love, but somehow in your head, you really wanted it to be symmetrical, so you just kind of downplay it, and you ruin kind of the moment. You're not really supposed to do that. So if that's you, you're okay. You're in process, but don't make the customer feel bad. So as a business owner now, you might look at another person's business, their location, their bar, their equipment, whatever it is that you see. And instead of celebrating it, you instead bemoan the fact that you don't have the budget that they have, you don't have the location they have. And you might think to yourself, or make a judgment against yourself, that you are not as good as they are. Man, you don't know the context that other business exists within. And you're not going to learn your context well enough by looking at another person's business or career. You're just going to be distracted. So here's another one. And this one is not as readily seen as a negative comparison, but what it does is it kind of undercuts your power and authority as an autonomous person, someone who can make decisions, competent decisions that will help you gain confidence. And it's when we say, like, what would this person do in this situation? Oftentimes we have idols that we set up in our business where we idolize a person in their career. We are a big fan of their work, their business, whatever it is. And instead of thinking our own thoughts and instead of thinking our own solutions, we immediately run to figure out what this other person in our mind would do. Now, we're not running to them because they really wouldn't have the time to answer all of our questions. But there's this construction in our mind of this other individual and saying, well, what would they do in this situation? And that's not completely wrong to do. We all need good examples in our lives. But when you find yourself going there all the time, you've forfeited your ability to create something unique and authentic and original to you, and end up simply copying another person. And not even that, because you don't know for sure if that's what they would do. But you will never know what good thing you would have invented had you not engaged in that thinking. So comparison, a negative comparison that you make, can create a false self that is a story that you believe about yourself, that you are inadequate, or that you are above adequate, or that you are more than you actually are. And neither one of those two things is humble. So when we engage in comparison that puffs up our ego or our pride, we suffer the negative consequences. So let me give you an example. Like, I used to compete in latte art, and I did it to some success, and many of you know that, and that's part of my story. But once I found out that I was really good at latte art and I started competing and winning, I realized how much I loved the recognition. I loved winning competitions or being recognized on the show floor because of a latte art DVD that I did, which was so fun to do. You can still find it at American Barista and Coffee School, probably selling it on their website, the Extreme Barista Latte Art DVD. So fun. Anyway, at the time though, it was cutting edge for the time, and it was something that fed my ego, and it caused me to not see clearly. And I remember at certain times saying some pretty unkind and arrogant things about other people and situations because of that clouded thinking. I allowed it to get to me. And, I poured milk into cups, really. I mean, that's it. It's the meaning and the context of it. It can be impactful. I'm not trying to downplay latte art necessarily. I understand it, but my need for validation gave rise to comparing myself against others as a way of checking in and making sure that I was okay as a professional. For you, it could be your menu. Like, you think you have a really cutting edge menu, and you feel like people aren't recognizing how cutting edge your bar is right now. Like you're like on the fourth, fifth wave, whatever it is. People need to recognize how great you are. And if they don't, well, get on my level. You just don't have time for those people. Well, that's pride talking, and it's definitely not attitude that is going to serve you well in your career. But for me, I had to assure myself that I was okay. And the reality was that I was atrophying professionally. I was throwing all of my energy outside myself and outside my context, worrying about what people thought of me. And it doesn't add anything to you. It never added anything to me. And I'm not immune from thinking things like this now. We're all human. The rest of our lives, we're probably going to be human. But here we are, learning different degrees of coming to terms with the kind of stuff that we allow ourselves to believe. And the results are this: the death of joy. Mark Twain, the quote from Mark Twain, that comparison is the death of joy. Way back in episode, what episode was it? Number 8, Finding Joy in Coffee, with your favorite coffee professional, Nathaniel May of Portland Roasting Coffee. That was a great episode. You should definitely listen to it. And that joy that he describes in working in coffee, and that joy that we all want, that's killed when we start to engage in comparison. It's the death of joy, death by comparison. And there's so much anxiety and worry associated with comparison. You start to downgrade your own achievements, and you lose the joy of your achievements' meaning, and you become a slave to the imagined approval of others. You become jealous of your friends and people who could inspire you to do better or benefit you and your business. Lack of clarity is another one of those consequences. And it teaches you, comparison teaches you to ignore what you have in front of you, but also to ignore the context of all of the things that you're looking at and comparing yourself against. Like I said earlier, you don't have the context fully, the true story of what it is you're thinking you need to measure up to. And if you did, you might feel a lot better about your situation and not be so tempted to compare yourself in that negative way. So one of the other consequences here of comparison is that it creates this knee-jerk response in us where we've bred so much insecurity into our mindset. We're so unsure of our own thoughts that we have to rely on the outside influences to guide our every step. We can't take risks. We have to make sure steps every single step of the way. So everybody that starts a coffee bar wants a formula to make a guarantee that it's going to work. They want a simple step-by-step process. Somewhere in your heart, even the most risky of us want to know there's going to be a return on the investment for starting a business, no matter what business that is. So what we end up with is a lot of people end up copying the big box stores. Of course, everybody tries to copy the Starbucks model. People try to copy Pete's, or again, I'm not thinking of other forms. It doesn't even have to be a big box store. If you have a favorite independent coffee shop and you want to do a coffee shop too, you can engage in the same kind of limited thinking as that by saying, I'm going to do things basically the same as they do because they seem to be doing well. And if I do that, then I'm going to do well too. Well, sometimes that's true, but what you lose from that is originality. And I know there's no true originality in the world. There's just creative innovations on pre-existing art and ideas. But there's a generation of content that comes from your heart as an expression of who you are and truly what you want to do. And if you've been engaging in comparison long enough, you're not going to really be able to distinguish your own voice from the outside influences that you've pretended are your voice for so long. So what you end up with is this echo chamber, or like a tribute band, where you just play the hits that this other band came up with and people praise you for it, but you're not really making your own music. You're just performing somebody else's music. Now, if you're fine with that, then that's great. But more and more these days, I feel like the unique, genuine, and authentic expressions of cafes are being demanded more by customers in their leisure for where they put their disposable income. And reflexively imitating others, we end up robbing our communities, ultimately, of the real value of what we wanted to do in the first place. And which for most of us is, of course, we want to start a business to be able to make money and provide for our families, but we also want to serve our communities. And you can't really serve your community well with a expression of somebody else's idea that doesn't take into account your community. So if you're serving, that kind of insinuates that you know what the need of the community is and who the people in that community are. And if that's true and you offer something that's detached, you're going to get limited impact and return on that. I think you could also think of this like having a lack of genetic diversity in coffee. So any crop where there's a lack of genetic diversity, there is a higher than likely chance that just the right kind of pestilence or disease can wipe out the entire crop. That's why these seed banks with coffee are becoming more and more important in our community. You have all of the great work being done by World Coffee Research in this area, which I would definitely recommend you go check out World Coffee Research's website over at worldcoffeeresearch.org. Learn more about this. But the point is that the genetic diversity of coffee house expression and business expression and personal career expression is important as well. Because if a customer turns and doesn't like a particular service style in specialty coffee, if we've all modeled ourselves in this echo chamber of doing things exactly like the next person and the next person and the next person, that'll threaten so many shops. It's better to have multiple expressions, authentic expressions that are unique and from the heart than it is to simply plug and play. And comparison is kind of the seed that once it comes up and grows, allows us to more easily make decisions that will create this kind of echo chamber and this movement of coffee shops that are similar to one another. So from where I sit, it's not really great to look at another business and assume they have success, and therefore if I do the same thing, I will be successful. You don't know what kind of funding they have. A lot of people are shocked to find out about the kind of private funding that coffee shops they thought were not privately funded, which there's nothing wrong with that, they're funded by. So, you might have been thinking, well, here's this scrappy underdog that is now like a multinational shop, and they did it all because they, they FIFO'd all of their coffee the right way, and they were just really friendly, and they did all the right things that I'm doing, and I'm going to get there one day. There are a lot of businesses that are artificially propped up as well in this business, just like restaurants. And it's not a one-to-one comparison. So it's kind of foolhardy to make that kind of comparison. Well, everyone, I'm really having a good time talking to you about this topic. And we're going to get to the solutions to comparison and kind of the comparison trap here in a minute. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our sponsor, Prima Coffee. So you know that Prima is a specialty coffee equipment supplier, and they are based out of Louisville, Kentucky, right here where the podcast is based. And from the beginning of their company, they have set out to make the best coffee brewing equipment available to the general public. And their focus is on curating the best equipment for every need. And that can span everywhere from grinders to espresso machines, under-counter fridges. That's like 3 things in a million that they have on their website, which you should definitely check out. It's prima-coffee.com. You might get lost in there because there are such a ton of resources, helpful videos on how to use the equipment they sell. And it's just a beautifully done website and a great group of professionals too. And when you're on the website and you watch those videos, you're going to find out quickly that they have the kind of expertise that is necessary to help their customers get the right gear to fit every situation. Like I said, they are a great group of professionals. I've known them since the beginning of the company, actually. I use them in the shops here in Louisville as well that I manage. So go to prima-coffee.com and check them out. Tell them I said hello. And my thanks to Prima for their support of Keys to the Shop and for supporting the coffee community the way they do with the tools that we need to do our jobs well. So let's get back to talking now about death by comparison. So here we are talking about comparison. What do we do about this? What are the solutions to avoid falling into that comparison trap? There's a lot written about comparison versus inspiration. There's a lot written about the comparison trap. And you should read that stuff. You should go out there, you just Google search this topic. It is plentiful. And there's a lot of great authors out there speaking about it. I'm going to offer you some solutions that I think speak to me and I think might speak to you as well. So the first idea is learn how to be inspired by people to become better at what you do rather than using their example to make a judgment on what you do. Judgment is very final. It says you are either good or you are bad, and you're going to stay that way. And that's what our hearts tell us. Inspiration says, I'm not there yet, but I'm going to get there or I'm going to become better and learn from this person. Not even so much that I'm going to become like them. I'm just going to become a better version of me, or my shop is going to become a better version of itself. I think that is an inspirational view that you can take that will allow you to grow and flourish and also take in the examples of other people without worrying whether or not they approve of what you're doing, because your metric for success is not them. Your metric for success is yourself and the impact you have on your community. This podcast asks you to compare yourself to others, in a sense, to say, here's what somebody thinks you should do with hiring, or here's what someone thinks you should do with training, and then asks the question kind of like, what do you think? What do you think of this information? Is it helpful? Did it give you some ideas? What I wouldn't want is for anyone listening to think, boy, they sound like they really know how to hire people. Oh, shucks, I really just don't know how to hire people. Well, I guess I'm no good at hiring. Far from it. I really hope that nothing we've said or done has inspired that at all. But for the most part, that's generated from within you. And if you're bad at something, or let's say if you're not as good as you'd like to be at something, then that's acceptable. In episode 44, we talked about mistakes and failures. It's supposed to be messy when you first start out. So you pour a heart and actually it looks more like a butt. And everyone thinks so. So it's okay because you know that you can fix it over time. You don't need to be like, well, I can't do this latte art thing. If you don't embrace the beginnings of your mistakes and everything else, the imperfections, if you don't embrace it, you waste it. Put that on a t-shirt because that's worth remembering. If you don't embrace it, you waste it. And comparing makes this immediate judgment of I'm better or worse or whatever, and it sucks. So whether you have a thrown together cafe or the first stammering interactions at the register, don't waste that by pushing it away as if it doesn't exist. Embrace it. So the next point here, the next solution is you should begin to see yourself and your business as its own ecosystem. It has its own canopy, its own forest floor. Needs of the environment are within it. And by paying attention to that ecosystem and making that healthy, you don't need to worry about what's going on outside of you necessarily. You can certainly, like I said, learn from the outside, but worry about the outside. Look at, if you focus on the ecosystem that you have going with your staff, your leadership, in your customers, in your community, and you grow and grow and grow that's a healthy ecosystem. It's made up of all the necessary components of a thriving business. Why get onto Instagram or Twitter or partake in a competition that robs you of the joy of that reality? Make sure you're practicing a focus of what you have and reinforcing that in your mind. It might take slowing down a little bit to see that. Attend to your own garden and look for improvements in it. Don't look for proving it. So you're not looking for proving, you're looking for improving. So another way that you can avoid death by comparison is ask for feedback from those who are most impacted by your business, those around you, not the ones who are just far off in another place that throw a bunch of compliments your way. This still feels good, but when you're getting compliments from your staff, from your customers, and those who work with you in the community, or fellow business owners, I feel like those are the types of things that you need to really focus on to make sure that you're not going to fall into this insecure cycle of comparison, but rather are finding ways to celebrate your successes by relying on the opinions of those who are closest to you. Next, you really have to set a vision for your victories according to something that in nonprofit work they call ROM, rather than ROI. ROI focuses on the return that you get on your investment. When somebody invests into a company as a venture capitalist or whatever, they want to see a particular return on that investment. And that's just a financial return. But return on mission is all about figuring out if this money you're spending or the decision you're making right now will further the cause for which you set up your business, or the reason for which you decided to become a barista. So going to a competition may give you that return on mission because you wanted to see what you were like as a competitor. And that was part of your goal, is to really push yourself. But for some baristas, going to a competition is the opposite of return on mission. It's something that they do in a perfunctory way, like they're supposed to do it, but it actually harms their mission because they just wanted to serve people, and they find that by competing all the time, they're alone in a basement more than they're serving people, and they start to wonder why they're doing it. Truth is, maybe you shouldn't do it if that's not going to give you a return on your mission. And so once you start figuring out what your vision is according to how you can further that mission, comparisons to other companies start to become less important over time, because their mission, even if it's similar to yours, it's not exactly the same because they're not the same company. And again, like I said, you need to tend to your own garden and you're focused on what's in front of you. So now another solution is you need to humbly practice working and practice resting. So humbly, meaning truthfully and honestly assessing oneself. Work in your ecosystem, work on your mission, and then practice resting. Practice resting in the work that you've accomplished and being satisfied in it. Okay? Not many of us give ourselves the space enough to be satisfied with the job we've done. Most of us can't even tell our significant others what we did the whole day. I started a little bit ago trying to figure out, okay, I'm going to write down everything I do in a day because it seems like a lot. I did it one day and it was a lot, but I just lose track and I forget to write it down. So at the end of the day, I just forget what I did. And even if it wasn't a lot, if it was the right things that I did, that's significant. It's not about how much you do. It's about doing the right things. And if I can go on a tangent here, I would highly recommend the book, The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. I think every manager should read that book. Now, getting back to the list. So humbly practice working and practice resting in your work. And in this, you want to generate original content. It's easy to become an echo chamber for somebody else's ideas, to be a tribute band to somebody else's song. And I'm not going to say that it's completely wrong if that's exactly what you want to do and you're cool with that. But I think for a lot of us, we would not want to be thought of that way. We want to come up with some of our own ideas. And in independent coffee shops, we are independent for a reason. So practice dialing in to what your expressions of this craft really are, and separate out from your mind those things that have infiltrated that you've just assumed are your thoughts and your ideas. Put them aside and say, are these really things I believe in? Or am I just doing this like we used to spin tampers on the top of a espresso puck because we want to polish, and there's some mystery science to that. We have to do that because if we don't, we're not going to make good espresso. It's not true. You don't need to do it. It was so hard for me to stop, but I just assumed that practice because everyone was doing it. Like tapping the side of a portafilter. In your career, like I said, there could be some things that you're doing in your business that you're just doing because I thought this is what coffee bars do. But if it's not you, there's no shame in just dropping it and saying, no, we actually don't believe in this and we're not going to do it anymore. So if you do compare yourself, and this is the last thing, if you do compare yourself to others, I would strongly advise that you really seek out more than the image of what's happening. Really seek out context. Figure out what their operations are like. What goes on in the guts of the operation is the most universally applicable thing. Look for the universal values that inform their practices rather than looking at the practices themselves, because those are just surface manifestations of a root cause. And I think you can learn a lot more from a root cause than you can from a surface manifestation. And it might teach you something about how to tend your garden, how to tend to your ecosystem and your career that you're focusing on. So those are my thoughts on comparison and inspiration and focusing on, prioritizing what's in front of you and the value of what you currently have, and really just dialing into the journey that you're on as an individual. And I hope that this allows you to celebrate other people and their victories rather than, feeling defeated by their victories or jealous of them and all of those other negative things that can kind of, once the floodgates are opened, they come into our mind and they really atrophy our growth. They stifle us and kind of become a prisoner to these thoughts. And I've totally been there. And I'm not going to say that it's not going to be tempting or I might not give in again to those things, but I'm going to be wiser for having gone through them And I know as you experience this, that you'll learn from it and become wiser as well. I hope that this podcast was at least motivational in some way for you to take a second look at what's going on in your career, in your bar, and find joy in the journey and be inspired by those around you. And don't let comparison trap you in a negative cycle. Okay, everyone. Well, I think that this episode speaks for itself. I do believe that we today have to practice a lot more intentionality and regularly ground ourselves in the reality of what's around us, or else we'll get sucked up into this world, this virtual world of, trying to make our coffee bars look like everybody else's coffee bars, not knowing the full story behind those places. And I've said this to people before, and I'll say it to you. One of the greatest joys I have is in seeing people who at one point in the industry might have been well known. And then they basically they start a coffee shop and they absolutely disappear. And they are successful and satisfied to serve their customers, to care for their staff, to create a great expression of coffee, and they're serving the entire coffee industry. They're having just as much impact on the coffee industry by not being a well-known entity that's like out there in the community, etc. They're having just as much impact on the reality of what the supply chain is and the coffee industry is, even in that expression. And I have to imagine, and I know this is true because I've talked to a couple of people about this, that there's a lot more peace with that. So let's get some of that peace. Let's get grounded. Let's love reality. Let's not get caught in comparison. Let's do well with what we have and learn to protect the joy of what is against getting caught up in what we think we should or could be. So again, I hope that this helped. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback from me about this episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, feel free to email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. That's also where you can reach me to inquire about Keys to the Shop consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. And now one of the ways that you can really dig deeper into creating a great expression of a coffee bar where you are is Coffee Fest. Coffee Fest for 30 years now has been offering what I think is the industry's best event for helping you build a thriving coffee shop business. For those 30 years, Coffee Fest has been going 3 times a year, and lately 4 times a year, to different areas of the United States, offering lectures, trainings, workshops, competitions, an amazing trade show floor where you get to interact with the vendors, selling goods for your coffee bars, and also, of course, networking with other like-minded professionals, hearing their stories. And this is a great environment to get energized and resourced well for the coffee journey ahead of you, whether you're just starting out or you're just wanting to improve your current coffee bar. Coffee Fest is an excellent place to go. So go to coffeefest.com. Check out the shows coming up in 2022, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Seattle. Also, Coffee Fest 365 is the new online learning platform from Coffee Fest. Go find out more information, register today over at coffeefest.com. And with that is the end of our show today. Thanks everybody for taking the time to join me today. I always appreciate you listening. Be sure to subscribe to the show, share these episodes with a friend, even leave a comment or a rating or review over at iTunes, Apple Podcasts. And I hope you have an awesome day. And of course, as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.